2. The Salamander House. That sneak of a mirror was what gave her away, lurking as it did in the little lobby between the main entrance and the inner glass doors leading to the stairs and the elevator. It was dim in the lobby, and Maya, trying so very hard to be helpful and cheerful, was hauling the umpteenth suitcase in from outside when a shadowy figure caught her eye and made her jump. An actual French person! What would she say? But at that very moment her dad slapped a button, and the lights came on, and she saw it was only her own worried face staring back at her, caught like a prisoner in the glass of the wall-sized mirror, like a strange, sad creature in a cage at the zoo. There should really have been a little label under the mirror to complete the effect. Maya Davidson, 12, human girl. Native to California. Now found only in captivity. Which all goes to show that it is hard to hide how you feel when mirrors are out there everywhere just waiting to pounce. "Hear that?" said her father. "That brother of yours is already making a racket." It was true. Some small elephant was galumphing down the stairs from the apartment 4 flights above, shouting loud, silly things as it went. "Ticky! Ticky! Boo!" Her dad stuffed another 2 suitcases into the tiny elevator and called up the stairwell. "James! Hush! Your mother needs some quiet." A pair of curtained doors burst open, and a large woman, her hair in a bun on the top of her head and one hand planted in mourning on her hip, came glaring into the lobby. "Monsieur," she said, but it was Maya she frowned at, and then she went on and reeled off a page's worth or more of angry French. You didn't have to know a word of the language to understand perfectly well what she was saying. Elephants in French apartment houses, not allowed. Noise of any sort at almost any time, not allowed. American children— At that point, James himself, no longer an elephant at all, came through the door into the lobby, and the woman swiveled her head to look at him. "James, this is Madame Pascal," said Maya's father. And James smiled and put out his hand, for all the world like a child who has done nothing but study the international rules of etiquette for years on end. The concierge melted, of course. Adults always did when confronted with James, the bear cub look of him, his tawny brown hair, his brown eyes, the dimple in his left cheek, the way he looked right into their suspicious faces and smiled. Everything that Maya had to steel herself to do, like asking strangers for directions or talking to the person in the next seat on an airplane, came as naturally as breathing to her baby brother. And he was only 5. While the woman started another speech in French, this one in an entirely different tone of voice. "How cute your son is! How adorable! How well-behaved!" Again, it was easy enough to understand the gist. Maya added a suitcase to the crowd of bags waiting for their turn at the elevator. They looked like such patient little creatures, those suitcases. It almost made her smile, despite everything. "No shoving now," she told them, and turned to go back for the next. It was one of those moments, the concierge retreating, her irritation apparently all evaporated, back into her den, James beginning to bounce up and down on his heels and pulling on Dad's sleeve, her father's face slipping for a moment into the tired worry that was always there somewhere these days. Thinking about her mother, probably. Thinking about noise. "James," said Maya, "you know you can't be loud in here. Let's go outside and look around." "Exploring," said James. "Cool." Her father looked so relieved that Maya almost felt embarrassed. "Oh, yes, good idea," he said. "That's my girl. I'll finish up here. Wait, here's a map of the quartier. Look, I'll make an X, that's our building, and right there, that's James's school. Go give it a look. Maybe you and the live wire," who was already pulling her right through the door. "Let's go over there," said James, pointing down the street with his free hand. No, it's this way," said Maya, finally having found their street on the map. "You heard Dad. We're going to go look at your new school." "Soon I'm going to have about 100 new friends," said James with total confidence, "and they're all going to be French." "Well, good for you," said Maya, and the bitter wave of thoughts that overtook her then, going to school, in this place, in French, with no friends at all, made her drag James along down the street so firmly that he yelped in protest. "You're pulling my arm off." "No, I'm not," said Maya. She did slow down, though. They had come to a pretty big intersection, and then it looked like they were supposed to go on up the next avenue, the one that went at a strange angle to everything else. "Well, you don't have to be such a grump-face all the time about it," said James. A flash of misery went right through her. Her mother had a saying for bad days: "Life is full of lessons, and the grades aren't fair." By which she might as well have said, "Sometimes your mother gets sick. Really sick, like having to go through chemo and losing all her hair and most of her get-up-and-go, and you have to be a very good sport. Not just for a day or a summer, but for years." And here are the lessons Maya had learned about trying to be always, always a good sport. 1. It's exhausting, and 2. Nobody notices, and 3. It doesn't really work very well anyway. Nope. Because consider this. When Maya's mother was finally done with chemo and radiation and all that other awful stuff, and tiny curls of hair were beginning to sprout up again like lamb's wool on her bare head, she had looked up from dinner one night and said in this funny voice, sort of wistful and hopeful all mushed up together, "You know, Greg, I was thinking again about Paris." There was a laboratory in Paris that wanted Maya's dad to come do research there. Physical chemistry, which was his particular specialty. A letter had even come from a society of some kind, all gold seals and long words, a special fellowship so he could bring his whole family, moving expenses, an apartment. "Almost like magic," said Maya's mother. "No such thing as magic," said her father, the scientist, "but it's pretty good news anyway." And then her parents both turned and looked at Maya. And at that moment Maya's fate was sealed. Because let's face it, when your mother, your one and only mother, whom you love more than anyone else in the world, has come back from nearly dying of cancer to say that her one great wish has always been to take the family to France for a year, you do not say no. You say at most, and a few months later all the muscles in your face will ache from trying to form the helpful, positive expressions good sports wear on their faces all the time, and you will find yourself standing on the Avenue Rap in the center of Paris, 5,000 miles from your best friends and your bedroom and your dog, and despite all that effort, all that time, every mirror you glance into will echo back your miserableness at you. She blinked away the tears as roughly as she could, and at that moment James yanked himself free from her hand and ran forward a few paces. "Look, Maya, it's a salamander on the door." James was very into salamanders because they were amphibians. "No, it's not," said Maya, without even bothering to look, and then she did look. "Hey," she said, "I take it back, that is a salamander." It was large and made of brass, and its head was turning to look at them. It was, in fact, the handle of the front door of that house, the one right in front of them. What kind of building had a salamander for a door handle? Maya stepped back to look. It was one of the strangest buildings she had ever seen. It was covered with patterns and carvings, iron phoenixes decorating the edges of the door, a beautiful, melancholy stone woman staring down at them from above the door, a fox draped gracefully about her neck. More people farther up. Were those Adam and Eve? Plants, the heads of cows holding up a balcony on one of the upper floors, and almost every line a curve of dark stone, swirls and curves like waves breaking or vines coiling. James had his head pitched at an impossible slant, the better to stare up at that complicated swirling facade, and then he started to laugh. "Look, it's you," he said. "They put a Maya statue on their building." "Don't be silly," said Maya. "That's not me." Her head was beginning to hurt. It had been such a long, strange morning. She squinted up at the building, and the sad stone woman gazed right back down at her, her carved eyes full of secret stone thoughts. "My hair's not that long," said Maya, but she almost didn't finish the sentence. It was true. There was something familiar about that face, too familiar, almost. She backed away another step or two, taking James with her. "It's you," said James with total conviction. "Cool." Was that really how she looked? Couldn't be. But then again, maybe she would look something like that if she were carved from limestone or granite or whatever it was. A stone mirror, she thought, and felt, for a moment, most peculiar. "Let's cross the street so we can see the whole of it," she said, her voice just a bit too loud in her ears. The building was not symmetrical. That was part of its oddness. About 3 floors up, a rectangular window on the left contrasted with a tall, curvaceous oval on the right, as if the building were raising a skeptical eyebrow, and above that, a narrow balcony lined with pairs of pillars in another kind of stone, something green and mysterious. It was another world, that building, and that other world was gazing down at them as they stood on the corner with their heads cocked back. "There's a man up there looking at us," said James, pointing. "See him?" "Don't stare," said Maya, grabbing James's hand again. "He's the one staring," said James, and then he smiled and waved up at that vine-green balcony, those undulating, gazing windows. "James!" Really, it was impossible trying to keep him under control. She looked up quickly, trying to assess the damage, and caught a glimpse of a dark-haired man leaning over the little balcony way above, something dangling from one relaxed hand. Glasses? A pipe? She had had enough. She swung James right around to get him back on track, facing down the other little street, the one his school was supposedly on. "It must be right here," she said, her jaw tense. And then, "Oh, whoa!" Because when they turned into that street, all they could see for a moment was a lacework of iron climbing high, high into the sky. "It's the evil tower," said James, delighted. "Is this my school? Wow, look at that! The evil tower is right above my school!" "Eiffel," said Maya. "It's the Eiffel Tower." The strange thing was it didn't look like any postcard of Paris she had ever seen. It was much huger than she had thought. It was really, really big. It was immense. And the building on the left really was an elementary school. But James could hardly be made to glance in the school's direction. His eyes were stuck like glue on that tower. "Can we go up to the top?" "Not now," said Maya. "It's time to go back anyway." "Let's go right up to the top." "I said not now." She practically had to drag him backward to the avenue wrap, his head all tilted with longing as the evil tower fell away out of sight behind his future school. They had to wait at the crosswalk for a moment then, just opposite that strange house with the salamander on its door. You could not help staring at that door. It was so alive with creatures and curlicues, and when the door swung open, the salamander looked back over its bronze shoulder at you in the most disconcerting way. No, not just that. It looked right at Maya and flicked its thin bronze tongue. Maya jumped and blinked. So that was what jet lag could do to you, make door handles come alive. But then the man who had just come out through that swinging door across the street paused to adjust his glasses with his long, pale hands, and for a moment Maya could see no salamander at all. "Look," said James. "There he is again. That's him." "Don't point," said Maya, her heart still racing a little from the weirdness of the salamander. "I wasn't pointing," said James. "I was waving." "Don't wave either," said Maya in some haste. "It's a rule. You can't wave at people you don't know." She said that very quietly, bending down over James's ear and kind of blocking his view with her arm for a second, just because you never knew with James when he might start not just smiling and waving, but, who knows, handing around invitations to his next birthday or something. "It's green," said James, unperturbed. He had been peeking under her elbow at the light. "Come on, did you see his dark goggly glasses? I bet he's a spy." The man couldn't have heard. He was all the way on the other side of the street, after all. But he paused for a second and turned his head very slightly to the right, just as a person might turn his head to listen to some interesting sound coming from fairly far away. And then he straightened up and walked away, his steps fluid and bouncy. Young steps. He was a very young man, despite the elegance of his clothes. He strode down the avenue wrap ahead of them, turned left at the corner, and disappeared. "Now we can go," said Maya, giving James's hand another squeeze. It was the strangest thing. There was something about that elegant young man, about the graceful way he sliced through all this soft Parisian air, that made a person want to run along after him for a while, just to see where he might be going. There was something about him that drew you to him, that made you want to see more of him, that might even, if you were James's age, make it very hard not to smile and wave. Maya could see that was the case. She could feel that call of his in her very bones. But it made her think for some reason of the magnets they show you in science class, bars of metal all furry with iron filings, paper clips, or nails, and the thought made her stubborn all over again. She and James were not paper clips, were they? She made her feet go extra slowly for a moment, just to give the elegant young man time to get well ahead of them and away. Just beyond the strange house with the salamander on its door was a little blind court of a street, and more curlicued stone, and what looked like the entrance to a theater, of all things. The Alchemical Theater, it called itself in elegant stone letters above a pair of large doors. What kind of theater was that? The smaller letters underneath didn't make things any clearer. The Society of Philosophical Chemistry, they said. Boofer would really like Paris, said James thoughtfully, eyeing the elegant stone corner of the Alchemical Theater. There are lots of really great places for dogs to pee. And then there was a boulangerie, which Maya knew meant a bakery, and an antique store and some other sort of business, and then a cafe across from the strangest fountain, all stone cherubs and banners, and by that point her feet were moving fast again, eager to get back to her parents and the apartment on the 4th floor in the Rue de Grenelle that would never, never, ever quite be home. "First you drag and then you rush," complained James. "I wanted to go up to the top of the tower." It was just as they swung around the last corner and their own doorway came into view that the strange thing happened. The door opened, and out stepped— "Him again," said James, and before Maya could think of anything to say or, alas, manage to grab his hand, James was already erupting into a big smile and a wave. At the same elegant young man, his hands once again adjusting the fit of the dark glasses he wore. They were really very dark glasses. And at this moment, those dark glasses were turning right toward Maya and James. "Ah," said the young man. It was the sound of someone rather pleased, for private reasons, by what he now saw. "And here," he said, "must be the children." He said it in French, of course, but Maya could understand every word of it. They weren't very hard words. What she couldn't understand, however, was why a stranger in Paris would be staring at her and James at all, much less exclaiming as if in recognition, and much, much less coming out of the door of the very building where the Davidsons were going to live. "Well, well, well," said the stranger, while one of his long, pale hands patted the other in an absent-minded way. "Perfect," he said. "The boy and the girl." Pause. "Indeed, most charming." And then the man nodded, turned, and walked away so fast that one otherwise unremarkable woman coming the opposite way was nearly bowled right over in his wake. A cold shiver went flying through Maya's limbs. What, after all, had the man from the salamander house been doing here? "Come on," she said to James, giving him one last impatient tug. Because suddenly all she wanted in all the world was to be already up those 4 flights of stairs and within sight, reach, and earshot of her ordinary, lovable, thoroughly unmysterious parents.